Welcome, everybody, to our next fireside chat. We're actually starting to launch this as called the Catholic Homeschool Podcast. And really just this is an outgrowth of all our wonderful opportunities to speak with, experienced moms like myself and Maureen and just all the guests that we have. And we're putting these on YouTube. You'll see that we're going to have them on all the podcast channels. So look forward to that. We will be announcing that. So today I'm thrilled to be able to invite Maureen into the conversation. Maureen and I are good buddies from a long time ago. We are also the co-founders of the Catholic Homeschool Community and the conference. And I just want to say, save the date. May 19th to the 22nd, yay, is our next big conference. I already have 40 speakers and my list isn't even finished. We're going to have some of those old-time favorites, with Kimberly Hahn, Danielle Bean, Laura Berquist, Sarah Mackenzie, Pam Bar, all of those guys are coming back. And then we have some great sponsors and vendors and just so many surprises for you as well. So please save the date, make sure you come. So today happens to be a beautiful day of the church. It's the solemnity of the Annunciation, and what a great day to get together with you. I was able to, go to mass and be able to pray for everybody. And I'm just so grateful again for the beauty of our church, because in this feast day, we are reminded once again of the Blessed Mother's yes. And without that yes, we would not have had the incarnation. We would not have the beginnings of Christmas. So without Christmas, there isn't Easter. And,
Right.
we're on this journey as we go through, constantly reminded. So I thought we'd start, Maureen, by saying a Hail Mary together in Thanksgiving for today. Okay. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Blessed Mother, pray for us, and Saint Joseph, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Great. Well, today we're going to be talking about homeschooling styles. And I just wanted to kind of say that I know when we talk about homeschooling styles, many parents may think, oh, that involves learning styles as well. And it does, to a degree. I mean, there's mommy's learning and teaching style, there's children's learning styles. But I think that conversation, we can't get that all done in 1 hour. So what Maureen and I thought we'd do is let's talk about educational philosophies, the homeschooling styles. We're going to go through that list with you, talk about them, talk about in particular, even just some of the programs that exist. Hopefully, if you have any questions, ask us as we start talking and kind of unpacking homeschooling styles. And then we will have a conversation. We will schedule, Maureen, right? You're going to come back, or we'll have some other speakers come in to talk about learning styles, because that's a huge subject and a really important one, as this time of year is really the great time of year that everybody starts planning their curriculum. So I'm going to begin with a little bio on Maureen. Okay, so Maureen Wittmann is a wife, mother of 7, and grandmother of 4.
No, I'm up to 7.
No, that's what I thought. I was like, this is old. There's more of them. So grandma of 7.
They just keep coming.
Yeah, it's so great. She is an editor and author and co-founder director of Homeschool Connections. Amazing resource. We'll talk about that too. And the Catholic Homeschool Conference community. She is grateful for all the homeschool parents who helped her over all the years and works to give back. And this is one of these opportunities, right, yes, Maureen, to pay it forward. Thank you for being here today. So Maureen, what is a homeschool style? And do I really even need one? And how do I figure out what's best for my family? I was just going to quote that, homeschooling, basically, according to the Coalition of Responsible Home Education, The modern homeschooling movement can trace its roots to John Holt. And I know familiar with John Holt, maybe
Yep.
you can talk about that. But he began with what was called unschooling in the 70s. Later than the Christian homeschooling movement started really in full force in the 80s, probably when we were starting. We were kind of late 80s, early 90s. And then by 1993, homeschooling was legal in all 50 states. But it had its roots primarily with John Holt and then moved through mainly evangelical and Christian groups into then everybody from secular to homeschooling. So yeah, tell us about a little bit about homeschool styles, Maureen.
Where do I begin?
Where do you begin? All right, so let's begin at the different ones. Because there's so many. The easiest one to talk about, I think, is school at home. Wouldn't you say? Right.
Right.
So what is
and
that?
that's where most of us start. So, my experience, I started homeschooling, 25 or more years ago. And we didn't talk a lot about styles, but most of us started with that kind of school in a box because we didn't know, right? Homeschooling wasn't a thing, or a big thing, it wasn't mainstream like it is now. And that's how we started. And then we kind of grew out from there, right? I mean, when I first started homeschooling, I met up with some local homeschoolers and I was going to sign up for kind of a school in a box program. And one of the ladies said, look, you're kindergarten. Why do you want to pay all that money? And she gave me Laura Berquist's book, Designing Your Own Classical Curriculum. And she's like, just put together your own thing. And it kind of grew out of there. And it, it usually takes a while before you find your style. It takes a year or two. You really need to find what's comfortable for you as a mom and what's comfortable for your children and the way they learn. Maybe your family dynamic, if you're into sports or, different things are going to affect that style. So a lot of us do start with that kind of school at home because that's what we know. And sometimes it works really well for people and they stick with that for their entire homeschool career. But then some of us kind of go off in other directions and find other
now I know
styles that
school
work
at
for us.
home and perhaps really this year in particular is how a lot of our new families came to homeschooling. And I know we had Kimberly give this, pandemic schooling is not homeschooling, but there is a legitimate need for people to understand that there are times where we're just, whether it's medical reasons or, for health reasons, you need your child at home. So what you're doing school at home is really following the school's program, methodology, their cadence, their materials, but doing the lessons at home. Perhaps you're having an outside tutor come in. I do know in Delaware that they do have a whole division in the school that they will, if for whatever medical reasons you need to be home, they will then assign you a tutor.
Well, that was my first introduction. So when I was 13, so that's a long time ago, I'm going to be 60 this year. But when I was 13, I had back surgery and I was out of school for 6 months and a tutor came to my house every day came 4 days a week for 2 hours. And that was really kind of my introduction because when I had to go back to school, I thought I got all this work done in 8 hours in a week. And now they want me to come back for 6 to 8 hours a day. There's got to be something else. But yeah, so that is an option. And with the pandemic, a lot of people, that's what they did because they were thrown into it unexpectedly, just took what they were doing at school and brought that home.
Right. Yeah. So there's pluses and minuses. I know maybe we can touch upon a few of those within that. And really, I guess the downside to a school at home is not that flexibility. But the pro side is that that if it's a limited time that you need to do this, you can slip your kids back into school, into the program that they were in. I mean, that must have happened with you as well, right? When you
yeah, homeschooling wasn't a thing, back in the 70s. So it was, but not really.
No,
not something
way
my
out.
we're about to do.
Exactly. Great. Good. So it's the next would be kind of virtual online public schools or online schooling. Now, we can get into that. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later because I'd love people to know about online programs and specifically Homeschool Connections.
Signing up for an online charter school or an online public school is completely different from signing up for an online homeschool program.
Right.
And my husband works.
So K-12, I want to isn't it K-12 kind of one of those typical?
Yeah, so K-12, they do take homeschool students, but they also run online charter schools. They do. So we have them here in my state as well. So, yep. So
Yeah.
typically with an online public school or an online charter school, it's what we were just talking about before, right? It's kind of school in a box. It's taking the live classroom and putting it into your living room. And the student responds to the teacher. In some cases, if you're going through the public school, that school has a right to come into your home and do home visits and things like that too, depending upon where you live. Your student is on the computer quite a bit, but the parents' part in it is pretty minimal. I mean, it's
Right.
not really much more than if you were sending them away to a classroom. Where an online homeschool program, the parent is still a homeschooler, and there's much, much less computer time, screen time. So that is one downside of doing a public online school is there is a lot of screen time. And then you also don't have say if you want to switch up the program or do something different. You don't have a lot of say in that area.
So you're not, as the parent, you're not doing the grading.
You're not the primary educator. So it's not homeschooling. I think Homeschool Legal Defense Association
Yes.
would not consider that homeschooling. So you would not be eligible to be.
Yes. Now, some
covered by
parents, would
them.
they do that, Maureen, if let's say, and I mean, I do know a family locally who had a child who had special needs, and it was a
Mhm.
way for them to get the kind of state funds and state programs
Yeah.
for that particular child. So it opened the
is an
door to
option.
that.
I do have one child out of my 7. I homeschooled all 7 of my children, but I have one who had some serious special needs who went to a charter school part-time. So we
Okay.
homeschooled part-time, and he went to the charter school part-time. And the school was designed for kids like him. There were only 10 kids in the classroom. It was project-based.
Mhm.
It was just one of those situations. So sometimes that is an option. Sometimes you have to take
Yes.
advantage of it.
Yes.
And you're still a homeschooler.
Right.
No matter where
Right.
your child is getting their academics, you're still a homeschooler because they learn their most important lessons from you. You're the one that taught them to walk and talk and love Jesus and their manners. And whether or not they're successful in that site-based school or that online charter school or whatever it is, a lot of that's up to you and how you support them in the home. So I would say you're a homeschooler no matter where they get those academics.
Wow, Maureen, I love that you said that because, I mean, again, one of the things I love to drive home to families is this idea that we are the primary educators of our children, and
Yes.
first and foremost, what? In the faith. And that's really, it isn't the academics. I mean, yes, we can do that, but it's first and foremost the faith. And you're right. When the kids are in school,
And it's in the
wherever the
catechism,
situation is.
right?
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly right. That's great. Thanks for bringing that up. So the next one I have on my little list is unit studies. And I know you've done some unit studies too. So tell us a little bit about what kind of styles unit studies.
I loved unit studies. In fact, I used to write them years ago for, was it magazine? It was Catholic owned at the time. Homeschooling Today.
Yes.
It's no longer Catholic owned, but in fact, they let me go. But when it went over to new ownership, but I wrote a lot of unit studies for them. And I love that. So unit study is basically focusing on one topic and then building all your lessons around that. So an example of that would be a program would be RC History, Sonia Roman's program. So what you do is with RC History is they focus on different eras of history, and then you build all your lessons around that. So let's say you're doing ancient history. So your history, of course, is that, but also your literature, your art. You might be doing mosaics, and learning about Roman history, science. You may be reading about
Archimedes or something.
Yeah, right. I was thinking, what are those great Bethlehem books? So you're reading about science during that time. And, when I had little kids, we did unit studies on dinosaurs, where math was counting dinosaurs and art was drawing dinosaurs, and we're going to the museum. So that's a unit study basically is just taking a topic and building around it. So it could be a historical era. It could be a scientific topic. It could be, we did a lot of nature studies in our homeschool. I tended to do a lot of unit studies every time I had a baby, so like one year when I was, because, when the baby comes,
Right. No,
um,
that's great. I remember you writing an article.
yeah,
Give us that example, because it's a
yeah,
great way to even, I mean, for me, I would do a unit study in burnout season, January. You can
yeah,
even do a
right,
unit study
right.
just to as a break, but you feel like you're still learning. Yeah.
One year
So
we made
tell
the
us.
baby the unit study. They measured the baby. They weighed the baby before I fed the baby and after I fed the baby and after we changed the diaper. I mean, we did a whole unit study just on the new baby. So those are
So
kind of
great.
fun to do. And you can, the nice thing about unit studies is you can include kids of all ages, right? So,
Right.
we always learned history together. We had a little co-op in our living room, just 3 or 4 families would come to my house. And, while all the kids are learning ancient history, they're learning it at different levels because we had kids from kindergarten to senior level. So they're
Mhm.
just reading different levels of books, but we can still have family discussions. We can still have co-op discussions. We can still do projects together and learn as a family, which is what
Wow.
homeschooling's all
Yeah,
about. Yeah. Some of and
naturally. Yes,
yeah,
yes. Multi-age learning. And that is one of those
yeah,
things that comes into play with homeschooling styles. Deciding on
yeah.
the pros and cons. Different styles lend themselves to multi-age learning. Others are a little harder to manage that. So is unit studies something then that a mom has to create, or are there programs around?
There are tons of programs out there. So, I was just crazy and kind of created my own, but there are tons out there. Like I said, RC history is an example.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes, if you want a Catholic one, I
yeah,
know.
St.
Yep.
Thomas Aquinas Academy. I think they're built around units. They're all about learning as a family.
Mhm.
Another term for unit study is interdisciplinary studies. So if you
Yes.
want to impress your teacher friends, yeah, that's the term I'm going to use, interdisciplinary. Um, Homeschool
Yeah.
Connections, we have,
Right.
so that's the company I run, homeschoolconnections.com. Our 3rd through 6th grade program is built around Philip Campbell's Story of Civilization, and it's taught as a unit study. It's project based, and the whole family learns together. And then what we do for the middle school and high school kids, we offer courses that tie into those unit studies. So if you want to include kids K through 12, that is possible. So yeah, there are tons of resources. If you
Wow.
Google unit studies, what's another one? Amanda,
Yeah. Bend it or something. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
something like that.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
her. She's not Catholic, but yeah, there are some
Yes.
good resources out
Yeah.
there.
And there are definitely ones. Exactly. Great. Good. Good. So you can address the subjects, separately. You can pull out some of them, but it is just another approach to homeschooling. And I do remember in the early days homeschooling that there are a lot of, I think, our Protestant brothers and sisters who actually do have a lot of materials on there.
Yeah.
Another area that, and again, that I tended to use was called lap booking or notebooking. And
Yes.
this tends to also work really well in this kind of unit study. So for example, as Maureen said, you pick a topic, and that too, it's a little bit more because it's the art of creating mini books and giving the child the ability to ask questions and find the solutions.
Yep.
But it can be interdisciplinary, like you said. We're going to incorporate literature, history, music, art with that one topic. So
And it's a hands-on thing. So children learn through multi sensory,
right.
so multi sensory ways through touching and feeling and seeing. So when you're
Right.
lap booking, they're creating these little mini books, or maybe they're doing dioramas or
Right.
things like that. Another resource I just thought of, I wrote a book years ago called For the Love of Literature. So if you happen to own that book,
Yes.
you can get it from the library. If you don't want to buy it, it's there's a whole section there on how to create unit studies, and it takes you through step by step. So you don't have to reinvent anything. You don't,
Yeah.
it just makes it really, really easy to
Yeah.
do. So,
Right.
list books on this topic, list projects, museums, etc. It makes it very simple for you.
Right. No, that's a great
Yeah.
resource, because again, that was kind of my go-to place for the love of literature, and especially if you're literature based. And maybe that's something we should go to the next one, which would be
Yeah.
Charlotte Mason style, which we call that twaddle free and literature rich. Yeah, great segue. So talk a little bit about Charlotte Mason and her philosophy, and what do we mean by Charlotte Mason education, and can we do it as a Catholic? So, yeah.
Yeah, so Charlotte Mason was a 19th century educator in England, and she owned, and she ran a number of schools, and they were called the, oh, now it's escaping me the name of her schools.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
she's a fascinating person. So she built her model of education on the trivium, on classical education. So the classical model comes from the church. And we'll talk, I'm sure, more about classical later,
Yeah,
and
we'll go that
3
next.
steps
Yeah.
of learning. But Charlotte Mason focused on a number of things within the trivium, such as living literature, reading living real books. So Paola mentioned twaddle. Twaddle would be Barney books, you know, where a living book would be maybe a Tommy DePaula book, you know, on the birth of Christ or something. It's a story that a living literature is a story that engages the reader. A picture book is going to have engaging, beautiful pictures that raise our hearts up, and the text is going to also raise up our hearts and not only learn the subject but really come to love the subject. So Charlotte Mason was also all about getting outside, right? Taking education in your backyard, doing nature studies, copy work. So copy work would be giving your child a piece of living literature and they copy verbatim what is in the book. And when they're little, that helps train their minds. Our retelling of the story. So that would be, for example, I would read my children a Bible story each day, and they would retell the story and draw a picture of it. And that teaches them all kinds of things. So reading comprehension, for one thing. So, you know, those are all little parts of Charlotte Mason. I'm really simplifying it.
Yes, yes, because
simple.
we could do a whole session just on Charlotte Mason.
You could spend hours talking about Charlotte Mason, but that's kind of the
Yes.
simple breakdown, is just recognizing the child as
Yes.
made in the image of God and full of desire, and really wanting, what we really need to do in a Charlotte Mason education is create wonder. It's to spark that sense of wonder, that sense of love of God's creation, and therefore learn.
Yeah. So now talk about, are there any Catholic versions or groups that are using that kind of philosophy? And I mean, I know Charlotte Mason wrote like an 8-volume thing, and there are people that have actually digested that and brought it into practical ways of implementing her methodology and her philosophy into a daily homeschool.
Right. So there, you know, there are a number of books out there, Catholic Charlotte Mason books out there. Elizabeth Foss is one that comes to mind rather quickly. There are a lot of really good, simple, I think Simply Charlotte Mason, I think, is another book. It's not Catholic, but it's it's one that will help you. I'm going to put a link in, I'm sorry, I'm grabbing it off the internet as I'm talking, for Manta Amabilis, which is
the
free Catholic Charlotte Mason.
Thanks.
I'll put that link in the chat here.
Great.
So what that is a free Charlotte Mason curriculum. So the books are not free. You need to purchase the books. And there are a lot of living books. So you purchase them or go to the library. With the pandemic, that may mean drive up and have them bring the books out to you. But I used interlibrary loan a lot in my homeschool. And in fact, For the Love of Literature is kind of a combination of Charlotte Mason classical and unit studies. So, okay, so Victoria's asking when to send, can we share a doc or email?
Yes, we happy to.
We'll do that.
We absolutely, yep.
We'll do that. So, but I know that is a really good resource. And then Mater Amplius also has a Facebook page that is very active and supporting parents who are using the program. So there is a board, and there are very active moderators, a whole team of moderators who are on that page who will help you implement that curriculum into your homeschool so that you can be successful.
And we also have several talks that we had in our June conference, you know, the 2020 June conference on Charlotte Mason methodology, again, in a Catholic environment,
Yep.
but we certainly will have people again in this new one, and also in the Catholic homeschool community. This is a great little segue, Maureen, that we
Yeah.
are forming groups. Our first group in there is the Unschoolers, but that's another way. There's over 3,000 of us in that group engaging. And yeah, that's the next phase is I want to, in this, next week, launch some of these groups, and that would be great. So have somebody over from that group as well. Good,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, so I know for myself, like when I began homeschooling too, I think I think about Charlotte Mason and all of that, it's this idea that a child is not a, blank page that you fill up, but they have
Right.
inherent dignity from the minute
Right.
they're conceived. And it's that blossoming and giving them the environment to do that as well. So
Right.
I think we'll see some blending of some of these different
We do.
styles. Wouldn't
Yeah.
you say
And
that?
I do think so. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I loved about Charlotte Mason too, that I think blends into other styles, is the
Mhm.
training of virtues. So each month we would focus on a different virtue. And so, she was actually pretty bookish in that, she, I don't want to say regimented, but, training children. It wasn't like an unschooling style. It was more regimented, where, you spend a whole month just focusing on one virtue and training for that virtue.
Well, yeah. And that was one of our talks last week with Monica's speech
Yeah.
on virtue. So that
Right,
was
right.
great.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yep.
it's wonderful. So yeah, implementing, and hers was again, character and education, and again, using the saints and Bible stories as ways. And so again, you can use Charlotte Mason, but we can implement these character virtue programs. And again, and we
Right.
have such a rich storehouse, even just from Catholic authors, but also from the saints in the Bible as well. So another great educator that a lot of people will follow as well is Montessori, Maria Montessori. That's another methodology. How about we talk a little bit about her as well? And I should say, what I always found was kind of interesting was that Charlotte Mason, I think, was never married and had children, and same thing with Maria Montessori, but they were like phenomenal
Right.
observers, and they believed in the dignity of the child. Yeah.
Well, even so, Frances Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton's wife, she ran a Charlotte Mason school,
Oh,
and the
wow.
Chestertons never had children.
Oh,
But
wow. Never knew that. Wow.
no, they struggled with infertility. They desperately wanted children, and they never did. But their home was always filled with children. And Frances Chesterton wrote plays for children, and she ran this school. So that is interesting. It's kind of like the nuns when we were little, who dedicated their lives to teaching us
Yes.
in the schools, even though they didn't
Yes.
have children of their own. So,
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
yeah.
I do think so. And I think both of these women, again, God bless them with this ability to be keen observers and be able to translate that into a methodology of teaching people to value a child and the way that they learn. So, Montessori, what about her?
Well,
Yeah.
one difference. So, Charlotte Mason was not Catholic, but Maria
Hmm.
Montessori was. She was about Catholic. She wrote that lovely little book about, the Mass for children. Um,
Yes.
I'm not as familiar with Montessori. It's not one that I've personally used.
Yeah,
Usually
I
when we
did
think,
read her book, The Montessori
yeah,
Method. And I love, again, one of those things, people may also be well aware of, there's the atriums and the
mhm,
catechesis of the Good Shepherd. These are programs that start to begin religious education and the religious education potential in children, and especially at the young ages. There's also Montessori schools, but when we talk about homeschooling and the philosophy, I think it's about trying to implement some of her philosophy in the way you approach education. And my seventh child, I can remember distinctly sitting at the dining room table, watching him take a pitcher of water and very carefully pouring it into a cup, and then taking that cup and pouring it over. And he would do it over and over and
yeah,
over and over
learning
and over
physics.
again. And it is my Montessori baby. And in many ways, because what he would do is to master anything new, he repeated that over and over again, or in a way that, and so I could have been like, oh my goodness, stop what you're doing. You're going to spill that all over the table. But having read her book, it gave me the courage to say, let your child sometimes find their style, even very young, in
Yeah.
how they are making an imprint in terms of learning different concepts. So these were motor skills that he's learning. He's learning, spatial skills of volume and
Yeah.
just even understanding those sensory things. So her book is really fabulous. But being Catholic in many ways, she even talks about how do you teach children the value, like in the number zero, and so I remember just very quickly a story about how the children were given the task of, everybody had a big bean jar in the middle of the room, everybody was handed a number, and what happens to the child, and the task was, go to the bean jar and pick out the number of beans that match the number on your little card. Now, what about the child who got zero? Because human nature, like, well, I don't have anything, and all these other kids are getting 3 or 4 or 5 beans, And she
Yeah.
related that to teaching children the virtue of sacrifice, and that being denial, you're actually being obedient to what you're being called to
Wow.
do. So yeah, it's a lot of that can be. So her book, The Montessori Method, I would say is the foundational one, and it's free online. You can look through it. It's dated in some ways, and being a typical Italian, which I understand, she goes into infinite details on what you feed children, and some of that you may not. So funny. Anyway, so moving on, we have what we call classical. You started talking about classical
Yeah.
education. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, so yeah, the dummy 101 version. So
Yes.
classical is really a model of education that's been around since Middle Ages. It comes from the Catholic Church. It recognizes how children develop and how we have different stages of learning. So there are 3 stages. You have the trivium. The first stage is the grammar stage. So that's where we get the term grammar school.
Mhm.
And the grammar stage recognizes that little ones are really good at memorizing, right? That's how they learn. I mean, it's how they learn their ABCs, right? And you sing a song, and they memorize that. They memorize poetry. They can memorize their Baltimore Catechism. They memorize their prayers. So the grammar stage recognizes that children learn differently in that stage than they do when they're older. The next stage, which would be middle school, is the logic stage. And so that's a stage when kids start asking, why, why? So you start answering that why question,
Mhm.
So while these children are memorizing their math facts in the grammar stage, in that middle school stage, they're starting to be able to learn things like algebra. They're starting to be able to ask why and answer that question, why. And then the third stage is high school, which is the eclectic stage. So that's the question when you start engaging them and answering those questions. So you start using Socratic method, where you're asking questions and they're answering and they're learning through exploration. I always think of the teenager on the phone, right? They love to express themselves when they get to that eclectic stage. Again, using math as an example, memorizing math facts, grammar, algebra, pre-algebra, logic. And then eclectic stage, they can start thinking about calculus and pre-calculus, which is a completely different level of thinking. So, same thing here. So you can start teaching philosophy. So, you might learn formal logic in middle school, and then high school, you can focus on philosophy. So it's just a different way of learning. And then using the Baltimore Catechism as an example, again, grammar stage, they're memorizing the Q&A. But when they get to that, eclectic stage, they can express why. What do those Q&As mean? What's the meaning behind that? So that's classical in a nutshell. Classical is also recognized or often associated with learning the classics, reading the
great
ancient
books.
Greeks and, reading
Latin
ancient
and Greek.
literature, even reading the pagans and pulling out of there, doing a lot of philosophy, a lot of logic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And
good
I like to
classical
think of it
education
as
is pretty solid education.
it's about that method, the bit by bit learning, using their natural stages of development, but forming their minds in that process. And again, you know, you do have variations of what's classical education too. I mean, I know there's the famous Dorothy L. Sayers, The Lost Tools of Learning,
Right.
where that really maybe brought it back in interest
Into
for
vogue,
people to
yeah.
kind of, into vogue and just say, oh, you know, pause. And again, during the conference, you'll be getting to hear people like Laura Berquist, who will be talking about, you know, classical education and the methodology that's used and to be able to help you to decide. But generally speaking, it is, as Maureen says, right, when you say very literature rich and very much in the great books. And what do we mean by the great books? We mean, right, that movement of the great books movement, Mortimer Alder, who started that kind of enriching the Western civilization using the great books. And even with that, you're reading some of those at the high school level, wouldn't you say, in a classical education program?
Oh, yes, yes. So yeah, it was interesting. I have a nephew of mine when he was at MSU, and he was reading Homer for the first time. But my kids were reading it who were in high school, so they're able to have those discussions.
Right.
So a lot of things that aren't even read these days until college, or even not at all anymore. A lot of the classics, a lot of Stern Civ has been scrubbed, right? But you know, back in the day when my dad was in, he was in pre-seminary for high school. But I remember him telling me they were reading Homer in the original Greek.
Well,
right,
yes,
right.
a
So
little
he's in
different,
his 80s.
exactly.
Yeah,
Right,
so we're so classical education is kind of moving back to that, reading those classics. And I didn't make my kids read it in the original Greek. But
exactly. But I mean, there is
examples, some Catholic, there's tons of Catholic resources out there for classical. There's Colby Academy. If you want to do a school, Colby Academy, Mother of Divine Grace. If you want to do individual courses, Homeschool Connections has a lot of classical. We do a little bit of everything. You know, we have over 400 courses, so you can do classical with us. What else is there? I mean, there's
Thomas
tons of great
Aquinas,
resources.
Academy, and then some of the Regina Caeli schools follow the Mother of Divine Grace kind of methodology. So there are definitely little
and Aquinas learning. Aquinas learning is kind of like classical conversations, only Catholic. So what that means is it's kind of a co-op setting where you meet in real person with other homeschoolers, and you meet once or twice a week, and the curriculum's all laid out for you. And then the other 2 or 3 days you're at home working on your own. So Aquinas learning is another resource for classical learning.
Yeah, and just sort of as a little side trip here, you know, that is another method, is joining co-ops, and co-ops can either be extracurricular or academic, and some of the co-ops follow a particular style of homeschooling as well. But the idea is with these or cottage schools, or now they're forming pod schools. So there's versions where there is families or students gathering together physically, or maybe virtually these days, doing that once or twice a week, and then doing the rest of the work at home. So there's this always coming together to do portions of their school. Exactly. So that's kind of some hybrid methods in there. But they do also, you have to look at and always ask, what is your educational philosophy and style within those, right? Great. So now let's get to we have two others that I really wanted to bring up. And one was, of course, unschooling, and then the last one is kind of a relaxed eclectic. But so unschooling, this is your baby, Maureen. So
unschooling is probably the greatest misunderstood style of homeschooling. Unschooling is not non-schooling, if that makes sense. A lot of people hear unschooling, they think that means you just let your kids watch TV all day and that's that. Unschooling, and I imagine, and there are people out there who do that, but that is not true. Unschooling is, again, you mentioned John Holt at the very beginning of this. It's child-led education, waiting for the child to be ready, having your child be a part of the decision process. All of the unschooled children I know turned out to be pretty amazing adults. So what is it exactly? So let me give you an example. So with my children, we do Homeschool Connections classes, of course, but that's not all we do. That supplements So, if I sit down with my children and we talk about what are their goals, what do they see in the future, what do they love, what kind of learning do they want to engage in. I have a son who we did Science Olympiad. That was his science. He loved it. This son never opened a science textbook except as a resource when he did Science Olympiad to look up something. Like, we never actually used a science program or a science textbook. Yet he's got a perfect score on his science ACT, and he's a nurse practitioner. So, but that was where he wanted to go. He took ownership of his education, and we went in the direction that he wanted to go. I didn't, he was dyslexic, so we learned really quickly that, he couldn't Latin and French, and, languages were difficult for him. And we went in another direction. So basically, in a nutshell, again, the dumbed down version of unschooling is child-led education, bringing that child into the conversation and making them responsible. So it's not letting them just do whatever. They still need to be responsible for those goals. I have an article in my head that I just need to write one of these days called The Organized Unschooler. And
great title.
Because I still had to teach my kids how to use a planner so that they could succeed in those goals that they set for themselves. And then there are little tricks that unschoolers do, like strewing. That's a common term among unschoolers, where I would leave interesting things around the house for them to pick up and kind of spark an interest, or if they saw me reading a particular book and they want to know what that book was. So there are little tricks that unschoolers will do to bring those children in and help light that fire. And so someone once said to me, so, is unschooling for the lazy parent? I think unschooling is harder because you always want to have that atmosphere of joy and of learning, and that sense, creating that sense of wonder. So it means getting up off your tushy and going for a walk in the woods and asking them to see the trees and maybe, to make observations. How is this trail different from when we did it last season, or when we did it in the morning versus evening? So you're always having to think like an educator, think about how to engage those children so they are learning and they do take control of their education.
So would you say it's so where do the thoughts come from in terms of when you say child-led learning? Is it just going to encompass all their subjects as well? Is this something that they are involved in the planning as well? And then the second part is, what does it take for a mom to have the confidence to kind of let go of that grading and the world's way of saying, well, what grade are you in and what subject are you doing?
Right. That is the hard part. And I think you do. So, all right, repeat the first part of the question.
So the first part was, when you say child-led, does it incorporate all subjects?
Incorporate everything. So so most people are not full-blown unschoolers. I mean, there are full-blown unschoolers out there, but I would say most people are not comfortable with that, which is kind of the second part of the question is, we're not, it takes a lot of confidence, a lot of self-confidence, and you have to let go of a lot of worry. So for example, with reading, most of us want our children to be reading by a certain time. My one child, the one who I talked about earlier, who we put in the charter school part-time in high school, he took off reading very late. In fact, he learned with his sister, who was 2 years behind him. And having dealt with a dyslexic child, I knew that he didn't have a learning disability. It was just a matter of readiness. So it does take some self-confidence. And if a child isn't learning, let's say they want to learn to read and they're not able to, then you need to say, okay, I need to get help. I need to see if they have a learning disability, which is what happened with my oldest son. With this child, I knew it was just a matter of readiness. He wasn't ready to learn.
And your older one gave you that experience.
His issues, he was medical issues he had. So yeah, it takes a lot of confidence. I remember my mother-in-law asking me every time I'd see her, how do you grade them?
Right.
I don't issue grades. We homeschool for mastery. And so I guess they all get A's because we don't move on until they master it. Now, once we got to high school, I do issue grades because I had college bound kids and they have to have a transcript. Now I know some unschoolers that don't even do that. Instead they will submit samples of work or other things. I was not that confident, and I'm not a full-blown unschooler. I'm more eclectic, relaxed.
Yes,
But
so that, which is the
yeah.
next category. But I
I went
do
through
want to,
periods of unschooling, and
I do want to encourage people. There is a really great little active group there in the community on unschoolers. Our dear lady Tina Rodriguez, who is in the Philippines, and she's going to talk about it at the conference as well. But how she came to homeschooling, and she told me her story. Can't wait for her to share it with all these families, because there is a lot of that letting go of the guilt of saying, the mom knowing this is what I need to do. This is kind of really what works for my kids and my family, and to let it go and not feel guilty that it's like, well, I'm not doing enough and we're not gauging things in the way that the world views success.
Well, and no one knows your child better than you. And we can't compare them to the world. So going back to classical education, when you do standardized testing, children who use classical model don't score as well as other children in the grammar stage. But when they get to the eclectic stage, they're light years beyond everyone else.
Right.
So if I'm focused on what's everyone else doing, how does my child compare to the kids in public school, I'll never get to that eclectic stage where they're light years beyond everyone else, because I'm worried that they're not caught up in grade school, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because it does, they don't do standardized testing well at that stage. They haven't been taught to the test, so they don't do as well, but they will later. So you just have to have the confidence that my child will learn. I'm their mother. I'm with them every day. I'm not going to let them fail. No one loves my child except for Jesus himself more than me.
Well, when you say failure, and it's interesting because again, that's one of the topics that I know that Kimberly Hahn is going to be talking about too, is we do in a way, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing of, how to fail at homeschooling, but it's really more the idea that of letting our children make mistakes and sitting on our hands and saying, let them discover, just like I said with my son with the Montessori thing. It is about sometimes sitting back and giving yourself permission to say, I don't know it all, but God has imbued this grace in me with these children are on loan. They're precious gifts. I only have them for a little bit of time. How about I just sit back and observe them for a while? And yes, it does mean sometimes you need to pick up some books and read up on the different methodology, because it might help you to be more insightful in terms of saying, wow, this kid is really amazing. They tend to be more of a sensory learner. So yeah.
Well, and sometimes just getting out of your house, and especially with the pandemic starting to go away, we need to get out of our homes and be connecting with community. So an example is I have this child, he's kind of like the dumb ox. He's like St. Thomas Aquinas, right? I found out later, when he was much older, that he has a near genius IQ. He's brilliant. But as a child, he still is. He's very introverted. And I was worried that, he wasn't that smart. And how could I have a child who wasn't that smart? And but we're out in the community and we're doing different things, and we're doing Science Olympiad and things like that. And one of the coaches came to me and said, oh my gosh, this child is brilliant. He's one of the smartest kids I've ever met. And it really woke me up. It's because he's just quiet and introverted. And, it wasn't that he wasn't smart. It's like St. Thomas Aquinas, right? When he was in school, they called him the dumb ox. And he's one of the most brilliant thinkers in all of human history.
Right. And so
get out in your community too. And you might see that child light up and show. You might find those gifts.
Yeah, sometimes parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles help you to see the things that sometimes, you're kind of in the thick of it and you can't see some of that behavior of your children. And especially because you yourself, and maybe we will talk about that because that kind of segues into learning styles, and that's a whole different topic in terms as well too. How do we match our children's learning styles to
Yeah.
these different homeschooling, styles and philosophies? So Maureen, we have just a few questions. We're
Okay.
getting closer to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure I get a few of these questions. So
Yeah.
if you don't mind, let's take a break here.
Yeah.
Victoria asked the question, and this one says she's new to homeschooling, former classroom teacher, which I always think is harder to do.
It is.
She has 7 kids, 15 to 9 months. Frequent problem she runs into is that the resources of some of these styles, when we talk about some of them, they're not nearly as visually engaging as our Protestant brothers and sisters. They're,
Right.
for example, she quotes The Good and the Beautiful. Additionally, many Orthodox sources use materials that look like they're 50 years old, they're out
Right.
of date, they're not ethnically diverse. Can you share Catholic resources in these styles that are representative and visually engaging? So,
Right. So
yeah.
when we first started homeschooling back in the day, I mean, most
Yes.
homeschooling products were stapled down the middle and homemade, and and that's what we wanted. We didn't want the flashy stuff. And now we're to the point where we want things that are visually engaging. We need that. And I think we're starting to move towards that. Again, Catholics are late to the game. There are not as many Catholics who homeschool as Protestants. People need to be able to make a living and feed their families. And so if we're not buying those products, they're not going to be created. So, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. I
Yes,
mean, for
there
example, you
is.
mentioned The Good and the Beautiful. That is a Mormon program, but it
Right.
is visually engaging. But there's a new program coming out called Salt and Light,
Salt and
I
light.
believe.
Yep.
So I have not seen it yet myself, but apparently it is a Catholic version of The Good and the Beautiful. I would love to see that.
Yes. Yes.
You
Maybe.
have
Yeah.
the Catholic Textbook Project, which which is coming out with Catholic textbooks for history that are visually engaging. They're beautiful books. They are expensive. You may want to look for them used.
Yeah, but you mentioned Philip Campbell's books, but there
Yep.
are, and she's right. I would have to say that a lot of material, and again, this also brings into play the thing is that homeschooling is not school,
Yeah.
and much of the material out there is really written for, it's like school and kind of tweaked for homeschooling,
Right.
or they've used, and I would say originally it was a reaction more than anything to the worldly things that were going on. So people had this knee-jerk reaction, and they're going to use, quote, pre-Vatican materials because, or they knew things were solid. I mean, and again, when we talk
Right.
about the Baltimore Catechism, it is so sound and foundational. But yeah, the pictures could be
They're
elevated
antiquated.
to,
Yeah.
they
But
are,
then you
they
have
are.
like the Didache, which is, from
Oh my
Midwest
gosh, they're
Theological. So that's a
beautiful.
high school literature or high school theology program.
Yes.
Very engaging visually. So there are things coming out. Sophia Institute Press is doing some exciting things.
Yeah, their
For
Spirit of
children.
Truth
Look
is
at Sophia
beautiful
Institute
too. They have a
Press,
whole art
searching.
program that
Yep.
goes with it.
And then online, for example, Homeschool Connections and other Catholic companies are bringing are creating things that are online. So they're not books, but
Yes,
it is a
yes.
very visually engaging medium. So that's
Right.
out there. So there are some exciting things. If I ever win the lotto,
Yeah.
I am
But I
going to
do think
invest
I do
in-
think that there is definitely that need, but we're seeing some new companies
It's
coming in,
happening.
and
It's
yeah,
happening.
and we're going to spread that word to these companies. And we have our Catholic Homeschool Directory, which is also part of the Catholic Homeschool Conference
Yeah.
here, and support those vendors. And these are the people that are out there trying to do, and bring
Yeah.
good materials to
Take a
you.
look at what Catholic Heritage Curricula is doing. Again,
Yeah.
I know that Sonia over at RC
History.
History is planning some brand new things along the lines of The Good and the Beautiful. So
Right.
take a look at what she's doing. RC History, Catholic
Yeah.
Heritage Curricula, Salt and
Right.
Light. What else have we mentioned? I mean,
Yeah.
Catholic Textbook Project for History, the Didache from Midwest Theological.
Yeah.
So yeah, just keep praying for it. I mean, one thing I would love is a good,
Yes.
solid science books. Those are hard to come by. Most of us in the
Yes.
business use secular books and then Catholicize them for
Right.
science. So yeah,
Right.
just really pray for that, the resources needed to create these beautiful engaging materials for Catholics comes about. Yep.
Yes.
And then again, we also mentioned Philip Campbell's Story of Civilization,
right. And I
which is
think that
also very good.
right
That's very
now,
engaging.
the digital world is making that possible for people to launch these new
It
products. So
is.
yes, so
Yep.
good, supportive. The other one Victoria also asks, can you speak of these styles for large families? How do you manage, if you have all these different, and that is sort of getting into the question of learning styles, because so if I decide I want classical education, or like you have different learning styles, how do we manage homeschool styles with learning styles? Yeah.
Right. Well, one thing to remember is homeschooling does take less time than the site-based school, because we're not changing classrooms. We don't have, well, I said we don't have discipline issues, but sometimes we have those.
Sibling fights. That happens in my family.
Yeah, you have to stop a lesson because Billy bit Joey, but it can be done. So one way we did that in my homeschool was, again, unit studies, learning as a family. We always learned the same era together. So as I said before, so we had little co-ops in our house. I never signed up. Well, I signed up with the school for one semester, and I changed everything. So it was a great program, but
Right.
I just was always changing to fit my family. So speaking as someone from that background, it can be done, but the way I did it was we were all learning very similar things at the same time. I mean, other things you can do is engage, if you have a large family, engage those older children, have those older children tutor the younger children, have the older children read aloud to the littles. That is beneficial in so many ways. Those older children are relearning their lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And the little ones just love being read to or taught by their older siblings. And it creates a beautiful bond. I mean, I have a daughter who, for example, I always tell this story, but she tutored my youngest son in math. And they have a very special relationship today. They're very, very close.
Right.
But this daughter also went on to major and has a degree in mathematics. I don't know if that would have happened if she wasn't my little math tutor, you know?
Yeah.
So lots of really good things come out of that. Again, one thing that helped us was getting out of the house. We did activities together. So for example, we did gymnastics, a homeschool style, local gymnastics gym. We went there and said, look, your gym is empty during the day, open it up for homeschoolers. And so we did that all as a family. We did shooting sports because we could do that as a family. If we did soccer or anything else, we're at 6 different soccer fields. We did backyard hockey. We always had a hockey rink in our backyard, and all the homeschoolers, especially those unschoolers, were at our house every day during winter ice skating. So for large families, you can use really any of these styles with a large family, but you need to make some adjustments. So find activities that you can do together as a family.
Yeah.
What can you
And
study
we did
as
have a
a
talk,
family?
which I did put on our YouTube channel, which is Jen McIntosh, talking about morning time or morning baskets. That is a great vehicle, which again, what you put in your morning basket can be related to the learning, to the homeschool style you're using. So for example, if you're going to be using, more of, let's say, a classical, you're reading, that's going to be the book that you're reading aloud to everybody. And you can divide up people, as you say, in different sections. I know I have 7 children, and we always had the big kids and the little kids. Some floated between, the middle guys floated between being a big kid and a little kid, but it just naturally divided the 2 groups up. And as you said, Maureen, just sometimes picking a historical time period or a science subject just helps the dynamics of the family still all being, we're all doing American history this year, even though we're doing this kind of homeschool style.
And you're doing this, one child has to do a science experiment. You do that as a family. I mean, we did so many kitchen table experiments.
Right. So I have one more question, Maureen, before we wrap things up. And this one is came through email. She said, my son was 6 on January 30th. The negative attitude he displays when I ask him to do any reading or writing is so challenging. He is a competitive, very competitive boy. He's been in nursery school system since he was 6 months old. She took him out of school just a year ago, has a brother who's 18 months younger, and we have a few families we see 3 times a week. How would you approach a disagreeable child to complete some project work? I've recently ditched our formal curriculum books, and I have even engaged lap books, something we talked about today, right?
Yeah.
There have been a small improvement in attitude, but it still seems like a battle's going on. And I've recently just taken a back step and letting him play. Any advice? What are your thoughts on that one?
You know what? Play is a good thing.
Play is learning. Yay.
Play is learning. And so I'm a radical here. We really did almost no formal learning until my kids were 2nd grade. We did, I had like a little math work. They love to do workbooks. I don't know what it was with my kids. We had a little homeschool store locally, and they would want to buy all the workbooks.
Yes.
My youngest son, he completed that kindergarten math workbook in like 3 weeks. So, we did some little math workbooks, and we did reading instruction, but other than that, we played, we got outside, we observed, I read aloud, they retold the story, went on nature walks, did some nature journaling, did some copy work. So just kept it very fun. At 6 years old, you don't want to be burnt out at 6 years old. And if he's been in daycare this long, and I was there too. I just want you to know, I worked full time with my first 2 children, and pulled them out of daycare, so that he may just need some detox time and some time to play. And I think it's really, really good. Yeah, it's really good, right? She's connecting with other families. That's such a good thing. And then start looking for what he's interested in. Maybe tell him, look, we need to learn. We need to, what does school look like for you? Fine. Again, if he's super interested in dinosaurs, then you do a dinosaur unit study.
Correct.
He loves to go to the museum, go to the museum. He likes spending time with grandpa, have grandpa take him fishing, or have grandpa teach him a lesson. My daughter-in-law, her mother comes once a week and does reading lessons with the kids, and the kids love it. Grandma's come in, she's going to do a lesson with us. So you just need to, do some kitchen table experiments if he likes things to explode,
Well, I hear this question a lot, Maureen, because and usually it happens with, in terms of kindergarten and readiness. And that is a big
it may not
issue.
be ready.
And when we're talking 6 years old, 3 months can make a difference. It actually, it really, really can. So sometimes we find when you're getting resistance, and this was some good advice I got way in the beginning too. Sometimes it may point to a particular learning disability as well too. So I know, for example, I had a daughter who was giving me resistance with reading, and it's because she literally did have a visual. It was laborious for her. It was a struggle for her. She also needed to hold something sensory, very big sensory, kinesthetic learner. And I had to learn that she needed to touch things in order to make things concrete. So it is, again, getting back to that observing, trying, testing, and sometimes putting the books down. And you did great, mommy. You did so great in this one, where you just, just play for a while. And then you can pick up the books in 3 months, and he may be a totally different kid. The other thing I would recommend is Andrew Pudwa does a talk called something about children who want to build forts all day, because again, this is a common thing, very typical with boys. Somebody I heartily recommend reading is Leonard Sachs, his books on, on gender differences. There are differences in how children learn. And very often the boys need to do things physically. They need to get the physical activity out. They're not ready to sit down for book learning, even at 6.
I always thought they should call ADD BOY.
Yes. Excellent.
Oh, my boys. And I had one son who I would try and make him focus on me as I was reading. And then I'd have him retell the story, and he couldn't retell me. But he could, if I let him play with Legos, and it looks like he's not paying attention, he's not looking at me, his hands are moving, he's playing with Legos, he could retell the story. And if we had lessons more than 15 minutes, I would lose them. So I'd set the timer, 15-minute lesson, go outside and play for 15 minutes, swing on the swing, or go eat an apple. And you just gotta make sure you set that timer so you remember, oh, I have a son. ready for yourself.
He's outside
And you
playing.
come
Bring
back
him
in and
in.
work. Yeah, you know, and he's an adult man now, and runs
Yep.
an IT department, and he can think for more than 20 minutes at a time. We had to
And
extend
that's the
that
other thing.
time.
Things, when it's hard, again, when you're in the thick of it, we have the luxury of hindsight, and to say, gosh, relax a little bit more. They will. They won't go to college with mommy. You know what I mean? This will happen.
Yeah, and
So
we've been
great.
there, right? I mean, there have been times, I had a son who wasn't learning how to write, and I thought, he's never going to learn how to write. He's never going to be able to go to college. He's smart as heck, but he can't communicate what he's learned. And then all of a sudden one day, instead of asking him to write a book report, I asked him to write a book, to write a piece of historical fiction. And I gave him the outline of what to do. And he took off from there. It was a project he loved. And he sat down at the computer, and we couldn't get him off that darn computer,
So
His
great,
sisters
Maureen.
want him to help him do the dishes, and he's too busy
Right.
writing, It was wonderful.
Wow.
So sometimes, yeah, and so we know, you and I both know, right? That pain of, am I a failure? They're never going to learn, but they do. Have faith in
They
yourself.
do.
Just keep praying. Take it to the Holy Spirit. Ask
Yes.
God's guidance. Take it to the Blessed Sacrament.
Yes. And today on the Feast of the Annunciation, again, reminder of Mary's yes. You say yes to marriage. God's granted you graces. You've said yes to your children. Trust in that grace. And so, Maureen, this has been a joy. It is always I learn new stuff, and you're just a wealth of knowledge. And thank you for sharing so much about, your own personal travels, but the wealth of knowledge you've had from all these years. I would encourage people to go to Homeschool Connections, to look at the programs they have. I think right now you're running summer courses, and you're going to have an open house next week, aren't you?
So, we do. I'm not sure at the time. Walter's handling that, but yeah, the summer courses. So again, a lot of what we do comes from my background. I like doing fun, out of the box things. So we've got coding with Minecraft, and learn how to play chess, learn how do art. So a lot of we have a course on the pandemic. Lots of just really interesting things. They start in May. So if you're finishing up homeschooling now and you need a little something.
Yeah, they're shorter courses and this and that. So do visit homeschoolconnections.com. It's homeschoolconnections.com.
Homeschoolconnections.com.
Okay, beautiful. Yep. Wonderful. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Do visit the Catholic Homeschool community. Again, we have our unschoolers group. We're going to launch some of the other groups, but there's many beautiful mothers there that are all different stages. Do ask these kind of questions. And Maureen, you'll join me again when we talk about learning styles. That's something we should tackle.
I'll be here whenever you want me.
Okay, great. Thanks. And do join us for our conference, May 19th to the 22nd. We hope to see you there. Spread the word. God bless. May you have
Take care, everyone.
Night. Thank you, everybody. God bless.